All right, we're continuing to look at campaigns and political participation in campaigns, and we're going a little more specific in campaigning and what that looks like. So 5.14, we go to candidate-centered campaigns. Candidate-centered campaigns. See, it used to be party-centered. The party had a convention and they chose their candidates to meet party goals. But then in the 20th century, as people started to elect the candidates in primaries, then it switched and it became much more candidate-centered. And this might not be the greatest thing when it actually comes to electing competent people, or maybe even electing the best people, or maybe the most moderate people, or people who represent the largest group of people, because candidate-centered campaigns have some issues. But we're going to look here just in generally at candidate-centered campaigns. All right, so one, primaries have led to candidate-centered campaigns. Candidate-centered campaigns. And that's because you're running against people of your own party in a primary, and so you kind of believe the same thing because you're both Republican or you're both Democrat. So the only way to kind of stand out is it has to do with like personality or, issues about the person, not really about the political party. If you watched, any of the people running for the Democrat primary in 2020, they all kind of believe the same thing. And in 2016, the Republicans kind of all believe the same thing. And so personality and some outside issues about, who could win the general election become more important than really policy or whatnot. All right, so the big thing is that personal qualities matter more now than ever. Personal qualities matter more than ever. We think back like personal qualities. You go right back to 1960. You got John F. Kennedy, JFK. I mean, he was Catholic and he was the first Catholic president. So a lot of Catholics were really excited to vote for him. The other big thing about Kennedy is he was young. He was in his low 40s and he was good looking. So like there were these personal qualities that he had that made him an attractive candidate. Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, he was a former actor. He had speaking ability. So he was funny. Like he always could, tell a story or a joke and make people laugh, and made a lot of jokes about his own age. So like this, personal qualities kind of helped him. President Obama, he was the first black president, and that was a big deal. By the way, but he also became almost like a celebrity during the campaign. That's a big part of, campaigning now is, achieving some sort of celebrity status. In fact, you see a little article headline I have. It was an interesting thing that happened in 2008 when he ran for president the first time, is that people just kept fainting at his rallies. Like this was just a thing where like people just passed out. As if the mere presence of being around President Obama, or at the time candidate Obama, was enough to make them just pass out. Interestingly, in 2012, when he ran for re-election, you didn't see the spate of passing out and fainting that they did in 2008. But this was like a common occurrence. And then you get, the TV personality, Trump. And of course, President Trump had been around for a long time, since way back in the 80s, and even was in Home Alone 2. If you ever watch Home Alone 2, like Trump actually shows up at the hotel. And then he had his own TV show, Celebrity or The Apprentice. And so you kind of get like the cultification, the personality, the becoming a celebrity. That's kind of what has happened as you get into this candidate-centered campaigns. They become much more focused on the candidates rather than positions or really what they might do or whether they're qualified or not. So what happens is that popularity becomes far more important than issue stances. There just isn't a lot of discussion of in any sort of detail that matters about real policy. And then lastly, last couple things here is so popularity is more important than issue stances. And in the 20th century, especially as you get into TV era, so like JFK after, it's just really intense mass media coverage. As cable becomes 24-hour news cycles, like with CNN in the 80s and then Fox in the 90s and so forth, this becomes even more intense. And then in the 21st century, we now even have social media becomes massive with that. And that really kind of hit with President Obama and then forward with President Trump. So you see that candidates, it's less about the party and policy and much more about who the candidate is personally. All right, party messaging. So in these campaigns, the party does try to message. Now, it used to be that the party would have a platform and then they would run on that platform. They put out a slate of candidates, but the candidates didn't really matter. What mattered was the candidates were committed to the platform of the party, and the party platform would be presented to people in a way that was kind of widely known. Now the platform doesn't really matter much because what matters is the candidate. But party messaging is still something that is attempted in order to help the candidates win. So let's look at that party messaging 5.15. All right, so one, parties still try to modify their policies and messaging to appeal to various demographic coalitions. So, for example, Democrats know that because they don't do well or very well among white people overall, they need to really appeal and they need to keep the high number of blacks voting for them. And they also need to appeal to the Latino demographic and have to have a pretty high number of Latinos vote for them. So therefore, you see like the headline here in the Atlantic, Democrats should be worried about Latino vote. Political organizers have a warning for 2020 candidates. And the point of this article was just that, Latinos are a little more middle of the road. They almost like 45% of Latinos voted for George W. Bush in 2004. In certain states, they vote Republican. Florida in particular, Texas, they're much more conservative. So hey, you got to be careful. So they're focused on that. And then Republicans have a real problem among women. Specifically suburban women recently. So you see a recent article here about more Republican women are running for Congress than ever. Well, and here's why. Well, here's why, because Republicans are trying to appeal to a demographic coalition. And by running women, they kind of help themselves probably a little bit. So the point is that parties know that their messaging matters, and so they have discussions about that. But again, if a candidate shows up and just blows it up, a candidate shows up and blows it up. They use communication technology in order to get out the message. YouTube, Twitter, social media, interviews on TV. I mean, they're using all these, whatever they can to get the message out. You can see here, Trump and Biden ads target Twitter and Facebook. So that's something that they're buying. They're trying to target you. So communication technology gets out the message. Next, they use what's called voter data management to disseminate, meaning to spread, control, and to clarify messages. So they're keeping track of meetings with people. So you got this door-to-door team that goes. They keep track of information in conversations they have with people. Then they meet people, and then they go back and update what sort of information they learned, and then they try to clarify messages as a result of that. This is a way in order to try to get the candidate to give a message that is going to appeal to the people that they need to win over, and also as a way to try to motivate people to get out and vote. So candidates that are really organized in a well-run campaign are going to really have a pretty hardcore data management system to keep track of people and make sure they get out their voters to vote. President Obama, by the way, was very good at this. Outreach and mobilization efforts. So part of all of this is getting out, reaching out to people, and then mobilizing the voters to actually turn out and vote. And who turns out their voters is the side that's going to win the election. All right, last thing in this lesson is micro-targeting 5.16, micro-targeting. And just like it says, micro meaning small. So especially with social media now and other things like consumer buying online, people and parties and businesses can know a lot more about you than ever before. They know what you buy, they know what you watch. They know the sites you go to, and they can track you using cookies. When the thing comes up, says, do you agree to cookies? Cookies are a way to micro-target you with advertising, and campaigns get a hold of that information to micro-target you. 5.16. All right, so parties use computer models to predict likely voters. So who are the people that are going to turn out for us? And we're going to make sure we get them out. Matter of fact, check out this headline recently. One ad has 3 different accents. How Democrats aim to win Latinos votes for for Biden. Sorry. So I saw the B and I thought Bush, but it's actually Biden. Sorry about that. So to win Latino votes for Biden, they have 3 different Latinos speaking in this ad. But they have 3 different accents from depending on where they are from in order to try to appeal to the different Latino groups. Not sure how well this will work. We shall see. They use, as I mentioned earlier, they use consumer data. What are you buying? A lot of companies can keep track of your data, and if you're not careful, you've already signed off that you agree that they can sell your data. Credit card companies, Amazon, any place where you buy things online, and then they can give that, campaigns can buy that information, and based on what you buy, they can kind of tell whether you lean toward them or not. For example, this is crazy, but based on what TV shows you watch, that indicates how you might vote. So 3 shows in particular, this is a big study on what you watch and how you vote. And 3 shows in particular stood out, predicting which way a state would lean more than 79% of the time. So that's pretty high correlation there. A&E's Duck Dynasty predicted a Republican victory. So if a lot of people watch Duck Dynasty at a state, it's a good chance the Republicans were going to win. Comedy Central, The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, which is definitely a more liberal program, lean Democratic. And then HGTV's Family Renovation, which accurately predicted wins for each party depending on the state. So, that's interesting. That kind of went both ways. Also, look at the headline down below. Study shows the car you drive may reveal whom you voted for. And then it said that when sedans in an area in a city outnumbered pickup trucks, there was an 88% chance the city would vote Democratic. In areas with more pickups, the odds switched. 82% would favor Republican. So basically, the car you drive, so what you buy is an indicator of how you will vote. In this case, cars, and in this case, the TV shows you watch. But by the way, there are studies on all kinds of other things that people buy as an indicator of how they might vote. They use census data questions in order to tailor messaging. So for example, there's some census data down below on talk about the number of people in America that are 65 or older. And the Census Bureau said that in 2016, they projected about 22.8% of the population was under 18, and then 15.2% are over 65. But look, by 2034, 65-year-olds are going to outnumber children under 18. Well, that means that political parties are probably going to start changing their messaging some, and it's going to less appeal to young people, and there's going to be a huge appeal to the older people because there's just more and more older people and senior citizens. So that's going to matter. Voting behavior. They keep track of the people who vote and how often they vote. And so if you're someone who votes all the time and they know you show up at every midterm, every presidential election, you actually probably won't get harassed much. But if you're someone who shows up for presidential elections but not at midterms, and sometimes you don't vote at every presidential election, then you might get a lot of phone calls and outreach to you in order to encourage you to vote. By the way, there's a little chart here on why young people don't vote. These are the things that people say. And so they didn't like the candidates as a small percent. Not interested, felt my vote didn't count. That's efficacy, bad efficacy. Too busy or conflicting work, whatever. I'm too busy to vote. Yeah, because you worked 15-hour days, I'm sure. In registration process. Now, the one thing they don't have in here is I really don't know anything about politics, so therefore I avoid it. That's the one question they didn't ask, which, by the way, is probably in most political science the number one reason people don't vote is they just don't follow the news. They don't have any clue about the candidates or whatnot. And then all of this information, voting behavior, census data, consumer data, computer models, these are used to try to mobilize voters and get them out to vote. All right, that's that. Some pretty intense campaigning information. Cool, study.